The 1920s marked the beginning of civilian aviation in the United States. By 1930, nearly 1,700 civilian airports had been established in the nation. As part of this national trend, in 1927 the city of Savannah bought 900 acres for the first Savannah airport, later known as Hunter Field. In 3 years, using mostly chain gang labor, Chatham County graded the field with 400,000 cubic yards of sand and planted it with Bermuda grass. The landing area was 4,500 feet long and 3,500 feet wide with no runways. Aircraft could take off and land in any direction. The original airfield lay roughly on what is now Hunter Army Airfield's parking apron. On September 20, 1927, the first aircraft landed at the Savannah airport. However, 1 month later, the stock market crashed, plunging the United States into the Great Depression. In spite of the Depression, the city undertook a number of improvements to the airfield. In 1936, the city spent $36,000, and the Works Progress Administration spent $130,000 in cooperation to make significant improvements to the airport. When Hitler invaded Poland in September of 1939, the U.S. Army had 175,000 men, ranking 17th in the world, weaker than both the Dutch and Romanian armies. The Air Corps, part of the Army at the time, had only 2,200 obsolete aircraft stationed at 24 airfields around the country. Still, the war seemed far away from Savannah in that late summer. On May 19, 1940, the city dedicated the airport as Hunter Field, named after Major General Frank Hunter, known as Monk. Hunter was a Savannah native and a World War I ace with 9 kills. In 1940, the U.S. prepared for war. The government increased funding for new equipment and bases. A primary beneficiary was the Air Corps, which by 1941 had grown to over 25,000 personnel and 4,000 aircraft. The Air Corps needed new air bases to accommodate its growth, and in August 1940 selected Hunter Field as a light bomber training base. Within 2 months, the Air Corps transferred 3,000 personnel of the 3rd and the 27th Bomb Groups, and 100 A-18 trainers, A-20 light bombers, and B-18 medium bombers to the new base, sharing the airfield with the civilian airport. Within 9 months, the military had constructed more than 220 facilities, including barracks, warehouses, a hospital, hangars, and operations buildings. On December 7, 1941, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. All passes from Hunter Field were immediately canceled. The U.S. now faced war with Germany and Japan. From 1941 to 1943, the base grew to a population of 10,000, expanded its boundaries from 900 to nearly 3,000 acres, built 6 additional cantonment and tent camps, expanded runway capacity, built aircraft parking aprons, and trained ground support squadrons, bomber groups, and fighter groups. After 1945, Hunter Field reverted to the Savannah Municipal Airport. The airport only used a small fraction of Hunter's cantonment, and the rest was leased to various enterprises, converting buildings to industrial plants, commercial businesses, and even apartments. Over the past 60 years, the installation has demolished most of its 450 World War II buildings. Structures that remain include a water tower, an abandoned ammunition storage area, a heat plant, 2 bomb site storage facilities, and 3 hangars. As the 1940s ended, the Soviet Union, formerly a World War II ally, attempted a blockade of Berlin in 1948 and exploded their own atomic weapon in 1949. The U.S. grew increasingly concerned with communist aggression and expansion. In 1949, as part of the Air Force's Strategic Air Command Southern Strategy, 2nd Bomb Wing and its B-50 bombers were stationed at Chatham Field. However, Chatham Field had inadequate barracks and operations facilities. In order to keep SAC in the Savannah area, the city offered to exchange Hunter Field for Chatham Field. SAC accepted, and in September of 1950, the switch occurred. Hunter Field became Hunter Air Force Base, while Chatham Field became the Savannah Municipal Airport, now known as the Savannah Hilton Head International Airport. By January 1951, SAC had slated a 2nd bomb wing for Hunter and spent over $5.6 million on the base, mostly in repairing World War II buildings, roads, and runways, and expanding the base to its current boundaries. In the summer of 1951, Congress spent nearly $6 billion on the largest military construction program since World War II. Hunter Air Force Base received $24.5 million, promptly spending $2.5 million on building what is now the installation's current runway. From 1953 to 1956, the installation, in conjunction with the Savannah District Corps of Engineers, constructed on-post family housing, 3 massive pinwheel barracks, new double hangars, administration and shop buildings, air traffic control buildings, and community and recreation facilities. In the mid-1950s, SAC began basing bomb wings in the northern tier of the country, closer to the Soviet Union and away from heavily populated areas. Hunter Air Force Base became obsolete. Within 6 months of the end of the Cuban Missile Crisis, all SAC aircraft had left Hunter Air Force Base. In the late 1950s and early 1960s, the Army developed troop-carrying transport helicopters, helicopter gunships designed for close air support. These efforts paid off when the U.S. became involved in the Vietnam War. The need for more helicopter pilots in the late 1950s and early 1960s drove the expansion of the Army's aviation program, which saved Hunter Air Force Base as a military base. In December of 1966, the Department of Defense announced that the official new home of the Army's Advanced Flight Training Center would be Hunter Army Airfield in Fort Stewart. During the Vietnam War, Hunter and Fort Stewart trained 11,000 rotary wing pilots and 4,328 fixed-wing pilots, including 1,400 South Vietnamese aviators. In the early 1970s, the U.S. withdrew all combat troops from Vietnam, and in 1972, the Army closed Hunter. The Army reopened Hunter in 1974 and designated it as a subpost of Fort Stewart and the base for its 24th Infantry Division's helicopter and support elements. By the late 1970s, Hunter had become the U.S. Army's premier rapid deployment node on the eastern seaboard, thanks in no small part to the facilities left behind by the Air Force, including the runway and the old SAC Alert area, now called Sabre Hall. Special troops or elements of the 24th Division could deploy rapidly as possible to anywhere in the world. In 1996, the 24th Infantry Division was reflagged the 3rd Infantry Division, the Rock of the Marne. In January 2003, soldiers of the 3rd Infantry Division were the first U.S. unit to enter Baghdad for Operation Iraqi Freedom, deploying from Hunter Army Airfield for the invasion. The majority of soldiers from the 3rd Combat Aviation Brigade are based out of Hunter Army Airfield. The 3rd CAB is comprised of UH-60 Black Hawk helicopters and medevac helicopters, AH-64 Apache Longbow attack helicopters, and CH-47 Chinook helicopters. Today, Hunter Army Airfield is home to more than 4,800 active duty service members, more than 7,500 families, and more than 740 Department of Defense civilians and contractors. Hunter boasts the longest runway in the Army, 285,000 acres of training area, as well as 23 miles of rail and access to ports, making it the Army's premier force projection platform. In addition, Hunter Army Airfield supports the surrounding communities by having one of the few public schools on a military installation, providing 1 of 7 jobs in the region, and through a $4.9 billion economic impact. We thank you for your support to Hunter Army Airfield, the launch pad for the Army Force.